Hello, hello. Welcome to Me Time with Mind Escape Vibe, where it is your time to be kind to your mind. I am super excited today. My guest on the show is a great author and just transformational person, individual. Today, we're going to be talking about her book, and I'd like to introduce to you guys Susan Gold.
Hey, Renee, good
Susan,
morning. How are
welcome
you?
to the show. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. So, welcome to Me Time with Mind Escape Vibe. I'm so excited to have you on. And before we get started, I'd like to just take a step back and allow you to go ahead and introduce yourself to the Me Timers.
Well, I just am so grateful to be here. And from my heart, I really appreciate the format, Renee, that you've created and what you're delivering for your listeners and your audiences. So thank you for that, because it takes effort and production and expense and all sorts of things. So hats off to you.
Thank you.
And I am an author. I am a coach. I did not think that I would find myself in this position. But here I am. Sometimes the universe leads you in new directions when you're least expecting it, if you're open to the opportunities of listening.
I know that's right. I like that. We listen, and sometimes just sitting still, it guides you in a totally different direction. So absolutely. So I always like to get started with asking my guests to share a mental victory vibe celebration. And that's something that you've done for yourself, maybe today or this week, to pour into your cup. So, Susan, what have you done for yourself lately?
Well, in my book, there's an appendix and there's a workbook, and it's exercises that I've actually learned and utilized throughout my walk through this incredible journey, being a human being on earth. And so, if we could just do one of the exercises right now, if everyone could just settle and take a deep breath in and then out. And then just take your hand and put it on your solar plexus. That's right at the top of the rib cage, underneath the breastbone. And just feel that solar plexus area for a second. And then either silently to yourself or out loud, say, I'm okay. I am okay. I am okay. And it's simple, but the impact is profound. And that's what I'm coming to understand. The longer I walk this walk is that sometimes healing comes in the simplest forms.
Oh, I love that. Yes, it does. And I love the I am okay because it's taking that moment to take a step back and to take a breath and just reassessing and reevaluating in your mind because it may be a heightened moment. However, but taking that step back and that breath really kind of calms you down to move forward. I love that. I love that. So not only did you pour this into your own cup, but you're pouring it into myself and the me timers today. So we're in for a treat. We're in for a treat. I'm super excited.
It's my pleasure, Renee, and it's my privilege. And I'm just so profoundly grateful to be in this place where I am now with a firm foundation under my feet, and to be able to share from a cup overflowing rather than a cup that was being drained by outside sources, by others. And I've learned how to give from my heart to myself and find self-compassion. And then from that place, be able to give and share with others.
I love that. I love that. Self compassion is so important. And with that, what is your personal empowerment or your self love theme song, Susan?
Oh my gosh. Well, of course it's Barry White. And it's just about anything that Barry does or did when he was here on this plane. Doesn't matter what song, but of course. Yeah.
You taking us way back, way back. Some of the listeners are like, Barry White. Google Barry White. You're in for a treat. You're in for a treat. So describe a moment when you allowed your intuition to lead you.
Oh, so many moments, and so many moments when I didn't listen. And, reflecting back, I wish I had, but the most profound, Renee, I had moved from New York City to Los Angeles for what I thought was an incredible career opportunity. I was a producer in television, and I went to Los Angeles to continue that work. But really, I was sent to Los Angeles to meet the man who would become one of my greatest gurus. And it may surprise your Me Time listeners to hear that that man was the one who would become my ex-husband. And I didn't know it. It was a long-term relationship, but I felt more and more drained, less myself, in lack, in fear, angry as the relationship went on. But I kept using that spiritual axiom: a finger points out and three fingers point back. So I kept saying, why can't I be more giving? Why am I so stingy? Why can't I appreciate? But what I came to understand was I was in a relationship with one that I feel was a narcissist. So all things came back to him. It all circled and fed him. I was a source of supply for him. And I was trying to make him fiscally responsible. And it was not happening because I was dragging with the weight. I felt like I was, pulling a 250-pound bobsled every day. So we went to mediation because I didn't want my marriage to disintegrate. I had come from a broken home and I wanted the triumph of a happy family. And I did everything I could to sort of present that ruse. But the expiration date was well past its due date when we went to mediation. And we came to the last point of the agreement. And I thought, my gosh, my marriage, it's going to be saved. My family is going to be saved. And he crossed his arms and his eyes went into those cold lizard-like slits. And he said, I am hiring an attorney and I'm filing for divorce. And that little voice was never as clear, crystal clear, and as grounding when it whispered to me, this is the universe doing for you what you cannot do for yourself. And I held on to that, Renee. It was 1 year of absolute hell, living in a home, which I then couldn't call a home. It was more a domicile, but a home nevertheless that I had purchased for our family and maintained. And he took up residence in the master while I went to a partial conversion in our garage with a mattress on the floor. And that little space, Renee, rather than becoming a prison, became my monastery. And I did a lot of meditating. I did a lot of work internally. And I chose to keep the focus on myself. And I maintained no contact, meaning no verbal contact and no eye contact with a man that I loved, because I knew I had to get through this experience. We had to separate and divorce. And that was the only successful thing that worked when you're trying to extricate yourself from this kind of circumstance. And it was a hard lesson to learn. But within 1 year, I was able to write him his 6-figure check. And he went on to his next source of supply. And what I gained was the authentic understanding of my power as an individual and to step out of that codependent wheel that I was on, chasing after what I thought was freedom from feeling abandoned or being neglected. But I was delivering that at great expense and great power. And this was a perfect storm coming together. It took every element I had. I was an endurance athlete, and it was one of the toughest endurance races I've ever ran, being in that circumstance. And I was a longtime meditator and holding silence and no contact. That was how I did that. I just pretended I was on meditation retreat. So it was a very difficult thing, but it was a very freeing thing. And I have to say, it was excruciatingly painful, but miracles happened. And that's where I really understood that my challenges and my challengers are all gifts of soul evolution if I can stay grounded and hold that belief firmly. And I got so much help from friends, from healing modalities, and I'm really grateful. So beauty does come in many forms.
I love that. So I read your book. Actually, I have it right here. So I read your book, and I was really taken back by how it starts. You talk about your childhood and coming into your childhood and a lot of your experiences there. And how did you have to channel and you learned from those experiences to walk through that experience with your ex-husband?
Well, I'm a little breathless here. I'm tearing up for those of you who may not have picture with this audio. First of all, Renee, thank you for ordering that book. And thank you for reading that book. It's so profound to me. It was not in my plan, but I was told by multiple intuitives that I had a book to write and that it was going to help a lot of people. And so when I see you with the book in your hand, it stuns me that you would go to that length as a podcast host and that you would read it. So just profound gratitude to you. And it just shows again what a bright light you are and what a beautiful heart-led being you are. So growing up in my household, it was very chaotic. And I knew early on that I was in an unsafe and even dangerous environment. My parents were doing the best they could, but it was hurt and damaged children, raising hurt and damaged and abused children. And it goes down the lineage. My father self-soothed through alcohol. You'd hear the whiskey cork pop off the bottle at 7:30 a.m. and glug, 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 glug. And my mother soothed through food and compulsively overeating. And back then, when doctors would prescribe diet pills, it was speed that they were prescribing. Mm-hmm. And it took me until my 20s to realize that. And I also believe my mother was struggling with the mental illness. So I was very empathic, and I was also quite telepathic. And I think that's what kept me safe in that household. And there were many times when I thought it would be easier to extricate myself from the planet than stay in that environment. But ultimately, it did serve me. And ultimately, with much hindsight and a lot of work in various modalities, I was able to see the gift in being placed smack dab in the middle of 5 children with those 2 adults. And I have profound respect for my parents and the roles they played. My siblings, we all have a very different experience of growing up in that household. My oldest brother his is almost all blacked out. He was really horribly abused, and he was quite abusive with me, even to this day. When I do see him, and I do see my family, and I'm happy to see them when I do. I watch my engagement, I watch my boundaries, and I've learned, I've gone through a process to learn how to be with my family. And they're very supportive of me now. But I have to watch my boundaries because sometimes that post-traumatic stress and those memories come flooding back, and I have to remind myself of my arms, my legs, my
Mhm.
breath, my feet on the ground. I'm not that 11-year-old girl being used like a lab rat in my brother's back room. I'm an adult. I have boundaries and I have love in my heart,
I
much
think
love
that
in my
that's
heart.
fantastic because one of the things that really stood out to me was in chapter 5 when you talked about your experience in 5th grade and how things were going a certain way at home, but you were acting out at school. And I think that's very common. Most kids do that. I know I did too, especially from those experiences because you carry that with you because home is what you have. And if it's a parent listening right now that is going through a situation where divorce is happening or separation is happening and their child is acting out, what advice would you give that parent to help that child overcome versus punishment?
So punishment is the last thing
Hmm.
that I would suggest. And I would never even suggest that. But if they can breathe and understand their child is a separate being from themselves with their own path for learning and experiences that they chose to have on this earth, and that they're an honored member of this human collective. And then speak to them from the heart and ask them what they need and how you can help them self-soothe. And it may just be from that same exercise we started out with, the
I am
simple
okay.
breath. I am okay. Putting your hand on your solar plexus, or even if you're up to it, your heart. That takes a lot of courage to go to the heart when you're in kind of taxing, abusive circumstances. And then I would go to the school. I would let the school know what's happening. And oftentimes the school can offer a therapeutic system that can be beneficial to the child. But if it's not, then I would draw a boundary and I would get private help if that's possible. And if not, just make sure that your child is learning techniques on how to self soothe. And that's as easy as taking a breath in and releasing it out and being aware of it. I coached my son the same way.
I love that. I love that. One of the things that really stands out to me as you're saying that, I went right to the page actually. I got notes in here, Susan. So I'm ready, but I got notes. Where you talked about exercise 9, and transformation, getting to know your emotions. And a lot of what you said thus far is really centered around that. And I love it. I enjoyed the book, so you probably already guessed I have notes around it. But I love
I
that.
I really appreciate that you're talking about emotion, because in my early 20s it was foreign to me. I was taught to shut down to
Yeah.
that having emotion was not okay. It was something to be beaten for, and just pull it together and stand up and put your big girl pants on.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so by the time I was 24 and I really needed help, and I was really lucky that I got help, and I went into traditional therapy, and the therapist said, "Well, how do you feel about that?" And I just would look at him like a deer in the headlights, and he would have to chunk it down so simply: happy, mad, sad, or glad. And I have to say, for a year it was just working on practically those four emotions, and I would get so frustrated. I'd just be like, how do I feel? Give me a list. Like, give me a list. And then I got more involved, and the emotions got more complex, and I could tease out the subtleties. But it's not something that our society encourages. And
No.
I think it's key for living a rich, healthy, abundant life, because otherwise I'm jamming it all down and my central nervous system is super overtaxed. And I'm drinking rock stars and I'm Red Bulls and I'm pushing it all down and I'm doing more than a superwoman would do to hide it.
I love it because you talk about that. This exercise, the emotion, getting to know your emotions exercise. You specifically talk about how to do this activity to address some inner anxiety. And I love how you mentioned, but I've been doing this since childhood, and it's amazing to me because you are absolutely right. I grew up too with the you don't showing your emotions is a sign of weakness. You don't do that. You stand strong and you stand tall. Let's acknowledge those emotions and let's try this exercise. And I marked this page because one of the things that I like to do is, but I have a grandson who's 9 years old.
Oh, you
And
cannot have a grandson.
yes,
That is
and
not possible, honey.
I've been teaching him breath work for probably the last 2 years since he was 7. So it just reminds me that what I do with him and the things that I show him, those are practical exercises to help anyone.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that we've just been trained away from that in our do more, be more perfectionistic culture. So yeah, Renee, I totally, think that's awesome. And your grandson is the lucky boy.
Thank you. I know I had a whole subset of questions. I have to ask about chapter 11, the facade of love. And I think that it's really appropriate with the June topic where beauty comes in many forms, because a lot of times everyone wants that connection. They want to be loved by someone. They want to be recognized and validated through that love. And if we have trauma or baggage, we carry that forward and expect the love from this other person, right, to heal that somehow, when we haven't actually taken the time to do that. And I want to get your take on that for young adults or people, maybe they're not so young. How can they embark on it? Because girlfriend, like you swimming, riding a bike, you did a lot and finding your way. I don't know if we have a lot of folks that's going to be out there, they might not do all three. So what advice would you give?
I want to say that it's not just that I wanted love from someone else. I wanted love and approval from all the things that I did to get that love from someone else, which included marathons, triathlons, and then within 4 years, getting a national ranking as a master's athlete in adult masters swimming when I wasn't even a swimmer. So you can understand the kind of crazy training. I was training with NC2A double A athletes. I was coached by Olympians, and I was going to kettlebell training to increase my muscle mass, and then in hot yoga, and just like taking it way out. But really what I came to understand, Renee, was I was numbing once again, just like I had since second grade and Billy Fritz on the playground. I needed that male attention to be anything, to be okay. And I was always trying to vie for my father's attention. And by the time puberty came, around 12, 13, he totally rejected me. And I never got over that. And so I acted it out, and I picked from the lowest hanging fruit in relationships. And ultimately, it cost me over and over and over again until chapter 11 came. And that my husband was my greatest guru. He laid that out so clearly. There was no way I could not pay attention to that billboard that fell on my head. And I had to stand up to that. And then not much longer after that was resolved, maybe a year later, I went from all that athletic prowess into barely being able to walk around my block without being in excruciating pain because I had pushed and brutalized my body for so long with
Mm.
all this endurance sport that I was doing. And I would go when I was feeling vulnerable and tired, and I would work through injuries. And finally, my body said, no more. You're dropping that false mask too. And I lost another identity. And I didn't go the Western medicine route because I knew they would just insert titanium and past go.
Mhm.
So I really worked for 2 years in chronic pain and then several years after to find the right modalities to heal.
Wow. What? Okay. So when I started to read, and I was reading the chapter really stood out to me for a couple of reasons. The facade of love for me was just trying to love myself because I was addicted to exercise, and I thought if I exercise 2 3 hours a day, and that could be 2 or 3 times a day, then
Mm-hmm.
I would lose weight, be thin, and I would be so happy and everything would be great. And it wasn't. It wasn't. I still wasn't happy. So when I was reading this chapter, it really resonated with me because I too went through a period of I have to, the only way I can be beautiful is if I am a certain size. The only way I can be beautiful is if I look a certain way. And when I read this chapter, I teared up. I'm not going to lie because it reminded me of that time. And it's not like it was, 10 or 15 years ago. This was like 2016,
Mm-hmm.
that I was doing that because I
Mm-hmm.
was in search of something. And it hadn't dawned on me that I needed to work on me. So when I read this, it reminded me of that day on July 9th, 2016, when I realized that it was something in me that I had to work toward to feel better, to find that happiness, because I defined happiness as happiness all the time. I didn't think that happiness was, the perils of life and making it through on the other side and celebrating myself for coming through. So when I read this chapter, I teared up because I thought about how much I did that. I exercised and I wouldn't let my body recover. I'd keep going because I was trying to obtain something that I really needed to find from within. So this chapter really it really stood out to me.
Well, that's such a revelation. Yeah, and it may not have felt like a celebration at that moment, but look at where it's brought you and how much your life has transformed
Yeah.
since you had that huge insight.
So when I
You're
read the chapter, I was like, how does she know? But it also felt good to not. Sometimes we all go through things, and we feel like we're the only ones, right?
Oh,
And
yes.
reading someone else's story helps you to see that you weren't alone. How you felt at that time, you weren't alone. That's why I think your book is really important, because it helps others who are in their moments of loneliness because they are caught up in what's happening in their life at the moment. It helps them to see they're not alone. And the exercises in the back helps them to see there's something that can help me right now. And I think your book's amazing.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you for that affirmation. And that means more than you know. And that I hope that I'm not saying this to sell books, trust me. And I'm not selling one-to-one coaching sessions or packages or any of that stuff. You'll know if you feel called to it. But if you feel called to the book, or you just want to check out the workbook, And it's that little intuitive voice that told me, this is the universe doing for you what you cannot do for yourself. Listen, listen, and allow your heart to open.
Want to ask you if you would describe a moment of truth that you experienced in your life, because it is going to bleed into my next question.
You are totally planned for this conversation, Renee. I love it. I think there have been many moments of truth, but one that was profound and really laid a roadmap. I took a slug out of a wine jug to ask for a raise at work. And that was a red flag. And that helped me see that I was using alcohol to be around people, that my goals were getting further away, and that the people that were surrounding me were more fair weather friends. And this was in my 20s. And that my life was actually replicating scenarios in my family of origin. And so I asked for help and I surrendered and I got clean. I got clean and sober, and I've stayed clean and sober. And I could have never addressed the trauma without that clean and sober platform.
So it was at that. So your moment of truth was the liquid courage to walk into work and to say, "Hey, I work hard for you. I earn this, and this is what I want in return."
Yeah. And then about 6 weeks later, I used to watch Barbara Walters on my belly on my beanbag chair in my basement growing up, and I was like, I want to go to New York City and I want to be just like Barbara Walters. And I did eventually make my way to New York City. I negotiated an internship in college, and I was 19 living in Greenwich Village. And then I was invited to join the arts management firm that I interned with after school, but I wanted to work in a glitzy skyscraper uptown and work in the mainstream of entertainment. So I did. I worked at International Creative Management, which is a large global talent agency, but I wasn't earning enough money to pay my bills. So I trained people on the side, and Barbara Walters actually became my client. And one morning I rang her doorbell at 7 a.m. And she took one look at me and she's like, Susan, get in here. And she's like, what is going on? I can see it all over. So she got it out of me that I had been sexually harassed the day before in the workplace. And she said, I'm coming to work with you this morning and we're confronting this man together. And I'm like, yeah, Barbara, I'm going to be okay. I'll do it. I did confront him that day. He asked me, do I have everything I need? I said, yeah. And he goes, okay, you're fired. And so I left that day. I had 2.5 months of cash in the bank. I had just extricated myself from an abusive relationship where the man held the purse strings. I'm not proud of it, but it was the truth. And I decided I couldn't assist anyone. Barbara offered me an assistantship with her then fiance, who was running Lorimar, which is a major movie distribution house then. And I said, Barbara, I can't be an assistant anymore. And I followed that gut feeling and somehow was led to knock on the factory door to convince Andy Warhol to do a commercial for Pontiac that he did not want to do. And it actually led me into producing for television and film ultimately, and to become known for matching celebrities with brands.
Now, was that your passion to do that? Or was that just how the path was at the time?
I was always interested in the entertainment side and the business end of the entertainment industry. And I always envisioned myself that way. And I was really curious about what a producer did, but I didn't really understand it. I just asked a lot of questions. And then I was working in that large talent agency and the celebrity commercial division and learned what that was about. And then I sort of just shifted that skill set into doing it for television programs. And I was successful at doing that. So successful that Roger Ailes, who was then running CNBC and his own network called America's Talking, was launching Fox News Channel, and he asked me to join him to help with the launch. So that it was really just organically unveiling. And my college boyfriend, he's so sweet, but he said, when I said, oh, I want to be a producer for TV, this was after we graduated. And he's like, you can't do that. You didn't go to school for that. And he did. He had a degree in communications and he was working for CNN at the time. And I didn't reply, but I thought, fluff that. Of course I can do it. And I ended up doing it and being successful at it. I just really have always had this ebullient belief. If I ask questions, if I stay open, if I ask for opportunities that will serve, it manifests.
Because I think we need more of that. And I actually feel like you saying that is a very important message for listeners, because self-doubt creeps in and it'll talk you out of that dream. But what you just said is to keep walking toward that dream, to keep walking toward it. No matter if there's noise saying, hey, you don't have a degree in that. Keep walking toward it. Right now, mentally, my mental language is, Renee, don't hop out of this chair and start clapping, because I'm like almost ready. Because someone will hear that and they'll keep going and they'll keep reaching for their dream. So what advice would you give your younger self to help cultivate self-trust?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I just found this yesterday. I took my son to his storage locker, and that is a photo of me at 3 doing a fish. So touching my toes to my head. And I was just looking at it this morning going, wow, you're incredibly flexible and tenacious. And you needed that. You needed that flexibility, that tenaciousness, and that joy and zest for what that moment was bringing you. And that really has served me. And I've held on to that joy and that zest, even through all I've traversed through: alcoholism, clinical depression, narcissistic abuse, sexual abuse, all sorts of things. Just walked right through it with that joy and tenacity and belief. Yes, I wasn't always joyful. I had excruciating pain. I suffered, but I held firm and believed. And I know the Me Time listeners can.
Hold firm and believe. Yet again, someone is going to get that message and keep going and keep going and not give up. Susan, I know I probably should have told you how much of your book I had engrossed myself in and all the notes that I had. But I want to thank you for coming on the show today. I firmly believe that I come across people who enlighten me to continue to strive to be the best person that I can be each day. And I had a lot of yeah moments. But at the same time, after that yeah moment, I was like, but I made it through. How can the Me Timers read more about your work or learn more about Susan Gold?
Just go to susangold.us if you feel moved. Only if you feel moved. It's susangold.us and everything's there.
All right. Well, you heard it here first, Me Timers. And just remember, this is Me Time with Mind Escape Vibe, where it is your time to be kind to your mind. I hope your day is great.